أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المذلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مذلوم يا عطشان كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم والأمن من لجأ إليكم سادتي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم سلام قولا من رب رحيم آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. In that famous and oft-quoted hadith from Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam, he states, Ilahi ما أبدتك خوفا من نارك ولا طمعا في جنتك ولكن أبدتك لأنك أهل لذلك. He states, O Allah, I do not worship you out of fear of your punishment, nor do I worship you out of hope in your paradise, but rather, O Allah, I worship you because you are worthy of worship. The ultimate objective for the believer is such that we are aspiring to being in a state whereby we reach that station worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He's worthy of that worship. And why not? For all of the blessings that we are drowning in and surrounded by from the Lord of the worlds out of His kindness and graciousness, our wealth and our family and our health and our well-being and all of the other blessings that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis, why wouldn't we be in a state of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every single one of these gifts that He has given to us? But that being said, at the same time, we know that for many of us, there is a need for some sense of incentive to get us to do the right thing. That's not necessarily a good thing. But nonetheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also recognizes us and fashions us, the human being, toward working toward physical and tangible things. The human being likes money, we like property, we like big homes, we like fast cars, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows this thing about the believer. Which is why throughout an abundance of ahadith of the Prophet and his family, alayhim salam, we have hadith that, for instance, tell us that if you pray this prayer, you're going to get this reward. And that if you fast on this day, you're going to get this reward. And the rewards are always something that are physical and tangible. It talks about a home, it talks about rivers, it talks about fruits, it talks about food, and all of these other physical and tangible gifts, because at the end of the day, it makes us have a sense of motivation to why it is that we are committing toward that deed and that action. The idea is to go beyond that in order to be as sincere as we possibly can, but nonetheless, we are still drawn to these items and to these physical manifestations. And within the whole Quran, you see that 1/3 of the whole Quran is dedicated towards speaking about the Day of Judgment and about paradise and about punishment. And God mentions things physically of that which is a reality in paradise or within His divine punishment, again, in order to get those manifestations of punishment to be a means that are prohibitive for us to commit acts of vice and sin, but at the same time, the rewards for us to be a motivation for why it is that we're doing good. Similarly, any one of us who like our work, we like our jobs, we are committed to the vision, at the end of the day, it's really hard to commit 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week solely to doing it because we care about that vision. Because it's tiring, it's consuming, we have responsibilities, we have family, we have a life to live. And amongst the biggest incentives for why it is that we do what we do is we get paid. It's because we get status, because we are able to provide for our families, so on and so forth. And fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with any of that. Again, as long at the end of the day, we still have some level of sincerity to what it is that we're working toward. In our work, in our profession, but undoubtedly as well in our worship and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the ultimate sort of objective of the human being, for many of us, if we ask them, why is it, or what is it that you're looking for in this dunya with regards to your relationship with God, they'll say we want to go to paradise. But there's a lot more to paradise. First of all, paradise has multiple levels. The highest of which level is in the company of Rasulullah Muhammad and his family, peace and blessings be upon them. But beyond that as well, there's something greater, and that is the contentment that we get, and the pleasure and the comfort that we get being in a state of servitude and submissiveness to the Lord of the worlds. Which is why, going back to that hadith, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he states, Ilahi abadtuka li'annaka ahlun lidhalik. That, oh Allah, I am worshipping you because you are worthy of that worship. There is beauty in this. There is a unique relationship that I can have in intimacy with the Lord of the worlds that is far greater than any physical, tangible gift or blessing or paradise that you can offer me. But that being said, this question around paradise also raises a lot of questions for people today. They say, are we the only ones who can get to paradise because we come from the ummah of the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi? Or I love the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and I'm Shia. Am I the only one who gets to go to paradise? I want to reflect on this question this evening, insha'Allah ta'ala, in three different dimensions. The first dimension is to speak toward the characteristics of paradise as God mentions within the Holy Quran. The second dimension is in terms of reflecting upon our responsibilities and the prerequisites that we need to get into paradise. And then thirdly and finally, answering the question of whether or not a non-believer can get into paradise. Let's jump right into dimension number one of our conversation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the details and the characteristics of Jannah numerous times within the Holy Quran. And perhaps the most popular one of these descriptions is mentioned in Surah Yasin, chapter 36 of the Holy Quran. In these oft-quoted verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Inna ashab al-jannati al-yawma fi shughulin fakihun. He states that surely the people of paradise, they have one job, they have one preoccupation. Your only responsibility is to be in a state of pleasure, is to be in a state of enjoyment, to have fun. And sometimes it's so hard for us to actualize what exactly that means. Because every enjoyment in the course of this dunya that we encounter is also mixed with a little bit of stress and a little bit of anxiety. You graduate high school, you feel great, but then you realize you have to go to college. You go to college, you graduate college, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, now I need to get a job. I need to pay off these student loans. There's always a stress associated with any joy that anyone experiences. And think about it. What is the happiest day, the happiest moment in your life? For me, the happiest moment in my life was when I saw the birth of my two children and seeing their little tiny faces. But even at that moment, which brings me so much happiness and so much contentment, even now thinking about it brings me stress, because the first question that I asked the doctor was, my kids okay? Are they healthy? Is everything going to be all right? And then we see that these children develop. Even though that it was so exciting and so happy, it messed up our sleep. They vomited on us. We had to go and change their diapers. And it consists of so many, an abundance of obstacles and challenges associated with that. Every moment of pleasure comes to an end. And every moment of pleasure also is mixed with a bit of stress and anxiety. I'll give another example. That there's a study that suggests that when people go on vacation, they see people around them. And whenever someone is on vacation because they are not working and they don't have any responsibilities and their only job for that week is to enjoy, they believe that everyone within that city that they're visiting is actually much happier than they actually are. Because through their happiness, they're looking through that lens and they see the happiness of others around them. What I'm trying to say, my friends, is that this world truly is a world where we are bound and shackled by trials and tribulations. And our perception of enjoyment is not the reality of that person who's walking in those streets or living in that city. They're going through the same difficulties that you would be going through back home. They're worried about finances, they're worried about family obligations, they're worried about, whatever it is that they're worried about. At the end of the day, there is no joy totally and absolutely in this dunya. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offers us some confirmation and validation when He states, Inna ashab al-jannat al-yawma fi shughulin fakihun. That for the people of paradise, you only have one job. You only have one role. You only have one responsibility, and that is to enjoy. Someone says, but how much can someone be on vacation? I don't know about you, but I can be on vacation my whole life. Someone says, but I want to work. I want to do this. In paradise, you will always be busy with something, but that something will always bring you happiness. That something will always bring you pleasure, and it will be removed of the drama and the stress and anxiety that we are bounded by in this dunya. Inna ashab al-jannat al-yawma fi shughulin fakihun. He continues subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he states, Hum wa azwajuhum fi dhilalin ala al-ara'iki muttaki'un. He states that in paradise, they and their spouses, they and their company, they and their friends shall be seated on reclined couches under shade. Now it's important to keep in mind that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions something with detail and precision within His book, it's not out of coincidence. He says it with reason. So number one, He states, Hum wa azwajuhum, they and their spouses, and many commentators of the Quran would extend it and say not only their spouses, but also their family members, their friends, their companions, people that they love to being in the company of. So let's break this down for a moment. Hum wa azwajuhum, they and their friends, they and those that they love, you will be joined with them in the world beyond this one. Someone says, but I want to have new friends in Jannah. I don't always love to be in the company of my family or of my friends. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preceded this verse by saying, don't worry, because in that world, you'll actually enjoy every moment of their company. Hum wa azwajuhum fi dhilal. Number two, that they'll be under shade. Because in paradise, the weather is perfect, but too much sun on our head isn't always comfortable. So we'll be seated under shade in total comfort and in total contentment. Hum wa azwajuhum fi dhilalin ala al-ara'iki muttaki'un. On raised, reclined couches, meaning that we are in a state of utter and absolute comfort. Again, beyond what our minds can describe. Sometimes after a long week, you look forward to the weekend, where you can just sit on the couch and do absolutely nothing. Knowing very well, though, that in a couple of days is going to be Monday. And you have to go back to the cycle and go back to work and be what you have to be that week until the next weekend. But in the world beyond this one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again offers us these words of console and comfort, saying that your only objective is to being in a state of pleasure and comfort and relaxation in that world. Hum wa azwajuhum fi dhilalin ala al-ara'iki muttaki'un. He continues subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he talks about that which is super important to so many of us, and that which preoccupies our mornings and our evenings and our nights, and that which is between our mornings and our afternoons and evenings, and that is food. Everybody loves food. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَهُمْ فِيهَا فَاكِهَةٌ وَلَهُمْ مَا يَدَّعُونَ. That in the world beyond this one, there is fruit. And the fruit of paradise is far better than the fruit of this dunya. Sometimes we go to the grocery store and you buy a particular fruit and you are craving that fruit, and then when you eat it, you realize inside of it doesn't taste nearly as good as you imagined. For instance, like you go and you see this apple, you touch it from outside, you see it's hard, you see it's firm, you think it's crunchy. The minute that you eat it, it's not crunchy, nor is it juicy, and it's pretty terrible. And in the world beyond this one, though, everything that we eat is far more delicious than what we perceived it to be prior to picking it up. But someone says, I don't want to eat fruit. In the dunya, I ate fruit, I ate salad, I ate vegetables. In the akhirah, I want to eat steak, I want to eat mashed potatoes. I don't want to affect my body or my health. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, لَهُمْ فِيهَا فَاكِهَةٌ وَلَهُمْ مَا يَدَّعُونَ. They will have fruit, and in addition to that, they will have whatever it is that they crave, whatever it is that they please. And again, Someone says, I don't eat these things because they're not good for me. Well, in the world beyond this one, there's no stress, there's no anxiety, there's no illness, there's nothing to worry. So again, if our job is to be in a state of pleasure, then enjoy. Over here in these first 3 ayat that I'm speaking to in Surah Yasin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions all of these characteristics of paradise in a physical, tangible form. The idea is that it motivates us and it inspires us to work toward being a people of paradise. But in the 4th verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says something super important. And the most important of these ayat, He states, Salamun qawlan min Rabbir Rahim. He states, and peace, a word from the All-Merciful Lord. I want you to imagine the scene. That we are in the state of bliss, in the state of perfection, having whatever it is that we have, enjoying the company that we are in a state of enjoyment, and so on and so forth. But more than that, what the human being loves than physical and tangible things is to be validated. For someone to tell them that you're doing wonderful. For someone to tell them that they are proud of them. A word of consolation is worth more than any amount of money, particularly when it comes from someone that you care about, and from someone that you love, and from someone who you respect, and from someone who you appreciate. Over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Salamun qawlan min Rabbir Rahim. Peace. The word from the All-Merciful Lord. What will happen? That we will be gathered here in this dwelling of paradise, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will appoint for us an angel who will come to us and will say, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to paradise. All of this food, all of this company, everything that you're enjoying at this moment, know that it's coming to you, min Rabbir Rahim. It's coming from you, from the All-Merciful Lord, who wants to tell you thank you for exerting yourself in this dunya. Everything that you did in that world and all of that struggle, it's manifested into this reality of perfection because God is merciful and He wants what is good and what is beneficial and what is best for His servant, provided that we fulfill our duties and our prerequisites and our tasks to Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that then brings me then to the second dimension of our discussion this evening. And that is with regards to what characteristics do we need to be amongst the people of Jannah. How do we become Ashab al-Jannah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions within this verse of the Quran? There are multiple different avenues and steps that we need to take, but I'll list out just a couple of them in the interest of time. The first one of them is our intentionality. إِنَّمَا أَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. To perfect our intention such that we are working solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we're exerting ourselves knowing that there is a God and to creating a system and a metric of God centricity during the course of our time here in this dunya. And it's hard because we have so many other motivations of why we do the things that we do. But when we are able to remove all of those other barriers and we're able to see God, again in the way that Ali states, Ilahi abadtuka li'annaka ahlan lidhalik. I worship you because you are worthy of that worship. At the end of the day, the idea is to empty our hearts of all of the distractions of this dunya such that we only see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the course of our deeds and our acts of worship. When Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam is in battle, he only kills out of the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we know in the famous battle of Khandaq, when he does not strike Amr bin Abdi with al-Amri at the moment that he has the capacity to do so, he walks back toward the tents of the Prophet of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they ask him, "Oh Rasulullah, why did Ali not strike Amr bin Abdi with?" He says, "Go and ask Ali yourself." They go to Imam Amir al-Mu'minin, they say, "Oh Ali, why didn't you kill him? That man, if he had regained his composure, could have gotten up, could have struck you, could have," so on and so forth. To which Imam Amir al-Mu'minin responds with his famous line. He states that when my sword was about to strike him and send him to the divine hell, Amr bin Abdi would spit in my face. And I was so enraged that I would have killed him out of my own anger. But Ali ibn Abi Talib only strikes out of the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, we see that when the Imam alayhi salatu wasalam is head of state, he has the power and the authority of 1/3 of the geographical world as we know it today, power and authority were the last things that Amir al-Mu'mineen was thinking about. The last things. Which is why he would stand in front of his ministers and the believers and all of his governors, and he would tell all of them that if you see me wearing clothes that are different than this one, and riding a horse that is different than this one, then know that you have the ability to remove me from this power of authority. Because to me, this life and this khilafah, if it's not ruled by justice, is worth nothing, not even the equivalent of the worth of my slipper. Because Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen and Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them, they teach us about what it means to being sincere and working solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake. This is number one. If we want to be a people of paradise, it's about emptying our intentions and working solely for Allah Azza wa Jal. The second one of these qualities that we need to aspire toward, undoubtedly during the course of these nights and days, is to fulfill this prophetic hadith of the Messenger of God when he states, Inna ashrafa ummati hamalat al-Qur'ani wa ashab al-layl. He states that surely the most noble of my ummah are two. Number one, hamalat al-Qur'an, the people who carry the Qur'an. It doesn't only mean people who carry the Qur'an in their pocket, but quite literally someone who carries the Qur'an in their heart, who spends time reading, reflecting, contemplating the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it doesn't mean that you need to recite Qur'an 24/7, but you commit to 2 minutes a day. Every single one of us have 2 minutes a day. If it means, for instance, 5 verses, you read the Arabic, and along with that you read the English. I know sometimes it's hard, but all we have to do is commit a really small, practical exercise on a day-to-day basis, and we'll find that through these small steps, you'll find that we'll begin to be able to understand and be exposed to the beauty of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can undoubtedly transform our hearts and souls in the way that we're working and the way that we're aspiring for. Inna ashrafa ummati hamalat al-Qur'ani wa ashab al-layl. And the second quality connected with this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is to being a people of the night. Doesn't mean people who are up all night, but who spend a portion of their night in obedience and worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be it in recitation of Quran, be it in prayers, be it in adhkar, be it in dua, a portion of the night, even if it be minutes, in worship and obedience and dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really all it takes is a really small measure. It doesn't take a lot. The idea is to hold ourselves to account every night before we go to sleep, because there's going to be one night when we go to sleep and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have not given us the ability to wake up that next morning. So every night, if we spend a portion of it in seeking God's forgiveness and holding ourselves to account, even while we're lying down on our bed, it's fine. To remember God, to reflect, to contemplate for those few minutes before you close your eyes, to make amends with people. If you got into an argument with someone in your house, close it and end it before you go to bed. So that there is nothing lingering in one's heart and one's soul before the conclusion of that day. Again, so that the new day begins, and the new day begins with the blessing and the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descending upon us. Allahumma salli ala wa ali Muhammad. And the third important prerequisite toward entering into paradise is to have intense love and affection and fidelity for the Prophet and his family, alayhim salatu wasalam. And of course there are many others, but for the sake of our discussion today, that truly this love that we have of the Prophet and his family, peace and blessings be upon them, is a love that has the ability to be transformational. We don't love Ali ibn Abi Talib because his name is Ali, nor do we love Al-Hassan because his name is Hassan, nor do we love Al-Hussein because his name is Al-Hussein, salamullah alayh. But rather we love them for what it is that they represent. In Islamic theology, there is a term that is often attributed toward understanding what it means to love. Let me explain this for one moment. There is a term known as hubbun dhati and another term known as hubbun tariqi. Hubbun dhati means you love something because of essentially what it is. Let me give you an example. We all love love. We all love patience. We all love, loyalty. We all love generosity. We all love compassion. Every human being, regardless of community, culture, religious background, they love these quality traits, and they don't need to be explained or personified in any other way other than what they are. Someone loves generosity, and they know what it means to be generous. So everybody loves mercy and people who are merciful because we love to be a recipient of that mercy, so on and so forth. When we talk about our love for Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, peace and blessings be upon them, we love them for the fact that they represent all of these most perfect and pure and pristine and sublime qualities in the most beautiful of manifestations. When we talk about Rasulullah, we talk about Fatima al-Zahra, we talk about Amir al-Mu'mineen, they are those who embody this perfection of patience and of generosity and of mercy and of love and of justice to the way that the human being has the capacity to do so. And our job by loving them is meant to be a means by which we reflect their behavior and their actions within our own. And that's truly what it means to being in a state of love of them, peace and blessings be upon them, that have the means and mechanism to allow for us to enter into paradise. And that brings me then to the third dimension of our discussion this evening, inshaAllah ta'ala. And that is to pose this question. Okay, there are people who have some of these qualities and some of these characteristics. They are sincere and they try their best. They spend a portion of their days in doing the right thing and holding themselves to account. But at the same time, there are plenty of non-believers who may not have been exposed toward the Prophet and his family, not been exposed toward the Holy Quran. Can anyone and everyone be admitted into this paradise in its lofty station in the way that God mentions in Surah Yasin or in other ayat of the Holy Quran? Or no? Is paradise only reserved for the Shia of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, or only for Muslims, or only for a specific group of people? Well, first off, it's important to note, my friends, that non-believers are not all of the same classification. There are levels in the same way that there are levels of believers. But before even we get into these breakdowns of the non-believers and determine whether or not they can go to paradise, one important prerequisite. We have a rational principle that we speak of within Islamic philosophy, within Islamic jurisprudence, and anyone who is familiar with an introductory study in the Islamic seminary, they've probably heard this phrase known as قُبْحَ الْإِقَابِ بِلَا بَيَانٍ. It states that it is unjust and irrational for someone in a position of authority toward penalizing someone or holding someone to account or punishing someone if they did not explain to them the rules of the game, so to say. I cannot, as a university professor, punish my students for showing up late and deducting, for instance, 10% of their grade if I didn't tell them on class number 1 that I'm going to deduct 10% of their grade if they show up late. It would be unjust for me to do such a thing. And similarly, it would be unjust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the all-just, al-adil, to punishing someone when they themselves did not know what their duties and their tasks and their responsibilities were to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. If someone didn't know the name Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, how could God punish him and say, you're going to go to hell because you don't know Rasulullah Muhammad? If someone didn't know the truth of Ali and Fatima and Hassan and Hussein, and the only thing that they heard was an entirely different narrative of who the Shia were. Of course, if we have the potential to do research, that's a different story, but for many people, they don't have that capacity. How could they be punished if truly they did not know what responsibilities that they had to them, alayhim as-salatu was-salam. And that's why when we pose this question of whether or not non-believers can be admitted into paradise, theologians within the school of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, have broken it down into 6 different groups. The first 4 of which go to paradise, and thereafter the latter 2 of those who don't have the capacity to go to paradise because of their own wrongdoings and their own sins. Before we get into this, if I can kindly ask you to recite 1 salawat, ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So who are these 6 groups of non-believers? The first group of these are individuals who have never been exposed to any of their responsibilities. Someone who lives in the middle of the Amazon rainforest and doesn't know, and their entire life is only fixated on survival. Their entire or primary job, for instance, is to care for their children and care for themselves. They're too preoccupied with living and surviving that how do you expect them to find the time to go out and to read and research and identify what is their role and responsibility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? A child, for instance, who passes away at a very young age. Someone says, where are they going to go? How could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not send them to paradise? Again, not only out of His mercy, but as well as out of His justice, these groups of individuals are known as the mustada'afin. People who didn't have any other route or didn't have any other way. Out of God's justice, it would be impossible for Him to punish them or hold them to account. And undoubtedly, out of God's mercy, He allows for these groups of people to enter into paradise. The second group of individuals are those, for instance, who they may have heard about religions. They may have heard about rights and responsibilities and all of that, but at the same time, they may not have had the capacity to go out and study. They may not have had the capacity to understand. I'll give you an example. Someone gives them a copy of the Holy Quran, but they don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. They're illiterate. Maybe today we don't have so many of these types of people, but historically, generationally, undoubtedly, dozens, hundreds, millions of people. Again, they knew that there was some task or responsibility, or they knew that they had to do the right thing, so morally they engaged adequately and appropriately. They were good to their family, they were good to their neighbors. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge their actions and so on and so forth, undoubtedly. But God says within the Holy Quran, لَا يُكَلِّفَ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not place a burden on someone that they cannot bear. How can someone read the Holy Quran or study the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and make a firm conclusion that Islam or the religion of Ahlul Bayt is truth if they themselves were never exposed or didn't have the capacity toward learning in the first place? So what will happen to them? Again, out of God's justice and out of His mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places them into paradise. Number 3, the third group of individuals or non-believers who will be admitted into paradise are individuals who sought the truth, but they themselves never got there, though they may have tried their best. At the end of the day, every single one of us have to have this firm desire and intention to seek the truth wherever it may be. And historically, generationally, there have been millions of people who knew that they had to figure things out. They posed questions like, what is my purpose in this world? Why did God create me, for instance? And as they went down this path, sincerely trying to figure it out, they landed at this institution, or with this preacher, or with this church, and they had a conviction in whatever it was that they were taught. At the end of the day, if they sought the truth and they died on that way, how could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punish them? Because at the end of the day, they intended for something. They intended for God. They may have landed in the wrong place, but they still made the effort towards seeking. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His graciousness and out of His mercy, He will enter them into paradise. And the fourth are those who know that there is a responsibility. They know that there is a responsibility to God, but they don't exactly know how to seek it. And they try their best, but they themselves also end up in the wrong place. Again, my friends, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so kind and He's so merciful to His creation that if someone exerts themselves and makes an effort, God will undoubtedly allow for them to be entered into paradise out of His graciousness. And I say all of this for us to reflect a little bit. Probably most of us are born into this tradition. We're exposed to the light of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And we more likely than not take that for granted. There's a responsibility that comes with it. Who's to say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't hold us to a higher level of accounting because we were gifted with this? Will hold us to a higher level of responsibility. We have the books, we have the hadith, we have the tradition, we have all of the gold that we could possibly imagine, but we don't read it, we don't study it, we don't reflect on it, we don't contemplate on it. That is a question that every single one of us need to pose, because we need to recognize that with this gift that we have been given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala undoubtedly holds us to a higher level of accounting and responsibility. And that brings me then to the last two groups. If all of these people go to paradise, then who goes to hell? Only a small minority. I say this all the time to my community back home, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us to be a people of Jannah. He's created us for us to be a people of paradise. He doesn't want us to fail, which is why He gives us all of these opportunities to get to where it is that we're hoping for. There are two groups of non-believers who are recipients of punishment. The first one of those are individuals, for instance, who know that there are religions, who know that there is a responsibility, who know that there needs to be some value, and they have the capacity to get that knowledge. Meaning that someone knows that I have to be a better person. Someone knows that there is a God. Someone knows that they have responsibilities toward their community and society. But because of their perspective on life, they rather say, forget about it, I got better things to do, I just care about myself, for instance. Though they have the capacity to learn, they refuse to. And again, I say all of this to ask myself before anyone else, we need to think about whether or not we're those people, even though we're born into a tradition, how much time and energy and diligence do we exert in seeking toward finding ultimate truth, or none at all. Individuals who have the capacity but fail to see it as an important responsibility of theirs to identify and to work and toward finding that truth, we're going to be held accountable. And for individuals who neglect this responsibility, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they will be recipients of punishment. And the sixth group of non-believer, and the second group of those who will be punished in accordance with the Quran and Ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, are people who are exposed to all of the light and all of the truth. They saw it in front of their eyes. But dunya, distraction, materialism, power, wealth, authority, whatever it might be, distracted them from that which they were ultimately aspiring toward, and instead they turned their face away. And the most perfect manifestation and example of that is the day of Ashura. Umar ibn Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas is the general of the army of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, in opposition to the Imam salamullah alayhi. Umar ibn Sa'ad, he knows who Rasulullah is. He knows who Ali is. He knows who Fatima is. He knows who Al-Hasan is, and undoubtedly he knows who Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is, standing on the opposite side of the battlefield. Yet Umar ibn Sa'ad, he sees power, he sees authority, he sees the ability to get some tangible gifts in this dunya as far more valuable. And so he says, even though I know truth and it appears in front of me, I'm ready to neglect it. And for an individual like those who saw Hussein alayhi salam, and who saw his women and children thirsty and exhausted on that day of Ashura, undoubtedly they will be held to account by the Lord of the worlds. On this night, we reflect upon the tragedy of amongst the greatest of companions and confidants, undoubtedly amongst the people of paradise, this friend, this supporter, this beloved of Al-Hussein ibn Ali, Habib ibn Madahir al-Asadi. A few nights ago we talked about Muslim ibn Aqil and the fact that he goes to the city of Kufa and he tries to get as many people, to recruit as many in support of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, but many of those had abandoned Muslim leading up to his eventual martyrdom. Amongst the staunchest of supporters of Imam al-Hussein and al-Hasan and of Ali is this companion Habib ibn Madahir al-Asadi. It is stated that the entire city of Kufa was placed on a lockdown by Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. So he was unable to leave the city of Kufa toward getting toward Karbala, toward fighting and supporting Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. So he was sitting in his home one day during these really difficult and trying situations and days. And he had someone knock on his door. At that moment, there was a man who had given a letter toward Habib. He enters back into the home. He opens this letter. He reads it. And as he's reading it, tears are rolling down from his eyes. He picks it up, places on his forehead, places it on his lips, and he kisses it. And his wife asks him, he says, "Oh, Habib." He says, "Who is this man who has given you this letter? And what does it say in this letter?" To which he says, "Oh, my wife, this man was a messenger of my master Hussein alayhi salam. He says that he is no longer able to make it to Kufa, and rather that he has been transported toward Karbala, and he is requesting my help and my support." At this moment, look at the courage of the wife. She says, "Oh, Habib, then what are you doing sitting over here? Get out and go and support your master Hussein alayhi salam." It is said that that evening he prepared his servant, and he tells his servant, "Oh servant, I want you in the darkness of night, so that no one can see you, escape toward the outskirts of the city of Kufa with my horse, and I will meet you at such and such time. If for whatever reason I get killed or I get captured, you take this horse, and you are free in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." It is stated that Habib prepares himself, and in the darkness of night he slips away from the city of Kufa. And from a distance he sees his servant holding on to the reins of the horse, saying, "Oh horse, if Habib doesn't make it, know that I will get on top of you, and we will ride toward Karbala, defending the son of the daughter of the Messenger of God." At that moment, Habib ibn Madahir approaches behind him. He embraces him. He says, "Oh servant, you've done enough service. You are free in the name of Allah." At this moment he says, "Oh Habib, how can I leave you if you are going to defend the son of Fatima? I will also come and support you." It is said that they get on top of the horse and they ride toward the city of Karbala. They arrive as Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is amongst his companions in these days leading up to the 10th of Muharram, preparing them for the day of Ashura. And when they hear and when they see from a distance Habib arriving, everyone begins to celebrate. One by one they embrace Habib ibn Madahir. One by one they tell him how happy they are to see him. At this moment, Imam al-Hussein, he embraces his elderly friend. They begin to exchange some lines. And at this moment, Imam al-Hussein, he hears Zainab calling out, "Oh Aba Abdullah, why is there so much commotion outside?" Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam enters into the tent of Zainab, and he tells her that Habib has arrived from Kufa safely. She says, "Oh Aba Abdullah, go and give my regards, go and give my salam to Habib." It is said that he exits from the tent and he goes to Habib ibn Madahir. And he says, "Oh Habib, my sister Zainab has sent you her salam." You know what happens? It is said that Habib ibn Madahir, he sits down on the ground and he places the sand of Karbala on his head and he calls out, "Man ana hatta tusallim alayya Zainab." He says, "Who am I such that Zainab alayha salam sends her salutations upon me?" On the 10th of Muharram, on the day of Ashura, he was amongst the first of the companions and the king and the leader and the commander of the companions who went out and fought. It is stated that Habib ibn Madahir al-Asadi, he goes out, he fights valiantly until he's surrounded by the army of Amr ibn Sa'ad. He kills 62 people until at that moment one man, he comes and he takes a dagger which strikes the head of Habib. He calls out, "Assalamu alayka ya Mawlai, ya Aba Abdullah." Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he rushes toward Habib. He embraces him. He asks him, he says, "Oh Habib, what can I do for you?" He has some of the other companions surrounding, and Habib begins to tell the companions of the Imam, he says that, "Please, my last will is only such that you defend this beautiful face of al-Hussein until you yourselves die as well. But I ask you, O Aba Abdullah, what state were you in those last moments of your life? You went back into the tents of your family members, of your companions, one by one, until you were the only one there." It is stated that in the last moments before the Imam went out to fight, he went out into the middle of the plains of Karbala. And he begins to call out, "Ya Habib, Ya Burair, Ya Muslim." One by one he names the companions of the Imam alayhi salam. He says, "Which one of you are here to help me?" We say to you, "O Aba Abdullah, they were not there, but if we were there to give our lives for you, we would have undoubtedly done so." La la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with grief in our hearts and tears in our eyes, to allow for us to be amongst those who walk in the footsteps of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, and to allow for us to live a life that resembles the life of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, and the death that resembles the death of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein in this life, and to grant us his shafa'ah in this life and in the barzakh and in the next life. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.